Hi, folks. My name is Adolfo Brandis. I'm with Atikro and have been for about 3 months now, right? We're coming up on 3 months. And I've been tasked with giving you folks the state of the front end talk with David Joy, but he couldn't make it, so it's just me. Um, the majority of opinions in this slide deck are my own. I'll make it clear when it's Tikro's opinion and when it's mine. Big disclaimer. Also, this is an interrupt the speaker kind of talk. So if you see something absurd, please feel free to interrupt me. I'll be glad you did. Um, all right, so without further ado, let's see if I can make the. Yeah, there you go. So the game plan is I'm going to give you a recap. The last one you got was in 2019 from David Joy. You'll see, if you remember that talk, you'll see some of that stuff here again, right? Because, well, stuff hasn't advanced as fast as we wanted since 2019, basically. Um, we'll see some successes, some failures, and we will try and find out where we're going from here, right? So let's go. My name is Adolfo. I'm a software Jedi at Tcroll. This is Kyle's title for me. Yeah, I didn't choose it, so yeah. Whereas David is principal software engineer at 2U. So let's go back to 2012 when OpenEdX, the front end at OpenEdX looked like this. So this is basically what you called in the olden days an MVC web application. Okay, basically the server owned everything. There were lots of Mako templates. There was a little JavaScript and CoffeeScript. How many of you caught that? Yeah, Fox, Sarina, of course. Yeah, Florian, you caught some of that, right? And for the most part, stuff just worked. Okay. So this is what it looked like in 2012. This is an actual excerpt from index.html in the templates folder in the LMS. You start by inheriting a file. Okay, this is a Mako template. You can do stuff such as use the context for functions or variables. You'll note that Anant was hard coded into index.html in those days, right? Uh, yeah, it was his project, right? Just kidding. And it was fine to do stuff such as including inline JavaScript in the template itself, right? This would be at least a little bit frowned upon nowadays, but that's the way things worked back then. Now, theming is basically the name of the game when you talk about the front end. This is what folks want to do without having to fork the code, right? So a little bit of history on that. In the beginning, the only way you could customize the theme was by forking. Okay, so you forked OpenEdX and you modified it, and that was it. Then came something called the Stanford theming. I think it was built by Stanford. I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure. It's called Stanford theming, but yeah. Were you around much-ish in those days? Yeah. It was Stanford. Yeah, and they didn't want to fork, which is a good thing, right? So cool, Stanford theming. It worked, but it was sort of limited to Stanford's use case, basically, right? And then came along by about 2015 something called comprehensive theming. That it was we were at that conference, right, Florian, where it was announced. I think I was, yeah, yeah. And it was the newfangled thing. Okay, it didn't replace what came before, but it was a new thing, and you could use it to basically modify everything. So essentially, you could replace the entirety of index.html in the LMS and whatever you wanted. all across the code base. So you could just change CSS variables or SAS variables, or you could just replace the whole thing. So Mako templates allow you to run code, so you could basically do anything, right? This is as extensible as it possibly gets. So by 2015, if you wanted to customize the front end, you had to deal with one of the ones on the left, and you had to deal with all the ones on the right, right? So if you picked comprehensive theming, you still had to deal with SAS v1 variables, SAS v2 variables, the edX pattern library, if your page happened to have that, of course, Mako templates, backbone, underscore. Remember underscore? Am I missing something? jQuery, yeah. The list is extensive. The point is you needed to go in many places in the platform to do theming. And yeah, it's all still here. This is not 2015. You can, as far as I know, you can still use Stanford theming if you like. And of course, comprehensive theming to this day. Studio theming, no. You can fork it, but the theming engine doesn't apply there very much. All right, back to the big picture a little bit. As with any project, there's some growing pains, okay? And this came to my attention recently, actually. There's something in the OpenEdX organization, or now 2U organization, that's called the ArchBOM team. And I've always heard of them. They were pretty important, but I never knew what BOM meant. Does anybody here know? Yeah, you know, you don't count. Anybody else? No? Sorry? No, it's a ball of mud. Is that what you said? Oh, but no. Yeah, you were. No. The BOM is the ball of mud. Okay, so this is a technical term in the industry, and it means, well, that your project followed expediency versus and above design, right? So this happens very often. There are papers written about this, where basically, when you have to change something, and by doing so, it would be ideal to go across the code base and update everything, you just don't. You start on something, you fix something, and you don't do what, I don't know, you would if the product of your company were the code base, okay? So at this time, and until very recently, the edX product was edX.org. It wasn't github.com/openedx, okay? So this is what happens usually when that's not the case. By the way, this is a nice ball of mud I could find, because, we're all here because it worked, right? It's complicated, hard to deploy, but for many of us here, it pays our bills, okay? So it works well enough. So we're here not about the backend. We're here for the front end. So because of the ball of mud, what ended up happening? First off, there was a server request bottleneck with the way things have been done so far. Essentially, each and every user request, if not cached somewhere, ends up hitting Django, and Django has to go and render that Mako template and deliver it to the browser, right? That's expensive. Of course, to solve this, there's been a lot of caching placed in front of OpenEdX, but still, it's an issue the first time you render any page. Deployment. Deployment story, as you all know, is pretty complicated. Only very recently, we started adopting Tutor as the default deployment method, and that has made things better. But as how many of you have or tried or need to rebuild the Tutor OpenEdX image? Yeah, there you go. How long does it take? 45 minutes, an hour, depends on your machine, right? Uh, so Tutor doesn't solve this problem. What happens when you do Tutor local quick start, it'll download the image. So if you have a speedy internet, you can get your environment up in like 5-10 minutes. But if you have to customize it, every time you change something, you have to rebuild the image. And that's not much better than the native configuration, native deployment method ever was. Okay? So yeah, this is still a problem. Hard to innovate. Anybody here ever tried to hack a studio page to do whatever you wanted? Right? Well, Piotr, you're good at it. But if you don't know what you're doing, it's a nightmare of spaghetti code. You have JavaScript mixed with Python and underscore templates. It's a mess, right? Hard to upgrade old tools. So you have this whole toolkit, this whole stack, and if you want to update, let's say, just the new fancy page you're working on to use a newer version of Backbone or whatever, well, you basically couldn't. So, all right. Here's the situation we're in right now. We have a number of competing ways of doing things. Okay, you can do one or both or all. So what do you do when you want to solve this problem? What do you want to do? What do you do when you want to cover everybody's use case? I did not tell him that. So I told you you'd like this talk. So what do you do when you have a lot of competing standards and you want to build a new one and you build one? You end up with those old standards plus a new one. So you don't get rid of all the other ones. You just have one more. So yeah, more. Now we have comprehensive theming, Stanford theming, and micro-frontends. We have Sass variables, a pattern library, Mako, backbone underscore, and React Sass to deal with today. Okay. If you want to see theme stuff, this is what you have to deal with. Okay, so in all seriousness, this time, we mean it. Trust me. But we never said it was going to be easy. All right. So why do we mean it this time? Because this time, our product, and by our I mean Tcro, is the code base. One of our products, at least. Okay. So we care if it's a mess. It doesn't help us at all if the code base is a mess, but it just works, right? Because what we deliver to you, well, more on that later. What we deliver ourselves is the code base, right? Whatever we work on, whatever PR we submit is going to be used by somebody else in the community. So we're going to be paying attention that the code is readable, if not necessarily pretty, and that it conforms to a particular vision of where we want to be in the next amount of time. The vision we're talking about here is micro-frontends, right? So with that in mind, what happened between 2017 and 2019? One day in 2017, I guess David Joy and got together with the folks at Archbomb, or I don't know, Serena, you might know this better than I do. And it was decided that we'd move to a micro-frontend architecture, right? You know who was directly involved? Just curious. Not sure. Oh, who went with ThoughtWorks? Namisha. I think Namisha had a big hand in this. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, Namisha. Namisha. No, it wasn't Namisha? beside the point. Sorry about that. The idea is good, by the way. I'm not criticizing folks for making this decision necessarily, but the idea was to improve the time to market. In other words, if you made a change, if you wanted to make a change to the front end, that it wouldn't take, 160 developer hours to make a small change to Studio, for instance. And the reason this would be improved is because the code would be more approachable. So you wouldn't have to grok 10 years of craft to optimize stuff just to make a small change, right? So that's the idea mostly. And of course, extensibility, but we'll get back to this in a moment. And this would be achieved by a modern front-end stack and via micro-frontends. I'm not even getting into what micro-frontends are, then plan in doing that. Do most of you know, or at least have an idea what they are? If you don't, you can come to me later and... Okay. You're like Florian too. It's in very short. It's a way to do web development where you're free to make different decisions for different pages. So you can totally use a different stack for each page, a different front-end stack for each page on your application. Not that that's a good thing, but you do have that freedom. And all front side or front-end rendering is done by the browser. So there's no server-side rendering. It's all REST API requests, and the browser itself does all the rendering. All right, so bird's eye view. This was the plan. This is where we were in 2015, 16, 17, roughly. The idea was to incrementally replace pages in the front end, all across Studio and the LMS, until eventually there were no Mako templates being rendered in the backend, right? it's all React and single-page apps in micro-frontends, and yeah, we'd be in nirvana. By 2019, the idea was that in the beginning, right, that by the end of the year this would have been completed. Okay, yeah. You can't blame folks for being optimistic and move stuff forward, but clearly we're not there yet, right? Do you folks have any idea how many MFEs we have at the moment? 8? Is that the only bet? 12? 11? If you go on github.com/openedx and search for front-end app, you'll have an idea. There are 18 right now, if I remember correctly. But they exist. That means there's a repo. How many of those are actually deployed by Tutor for Nutmeg? Yeah, 3, 4, maybe 5. We don't know. Good point. Okay, thank you, Florian. So Tutor itself doesn't include any MFEs. It's a plugin. But this is by design, right? And the default way to Tutor local quick start will get you some MFAs, right? Because some of them are necessary now. You can't live without them anymore, for good or bad. So by 2022, now, we have improved the time to market of some MFAs, or some pages in the platform. They're much easier to develop for, much nicer, right? And yet React is actually pretty cool to develop for, right? I see nodding heads. Any objections? Does React suck? A little bit? Okay, that's fair. Okay, yeah. I know the part you're thinking of, and I thought of you. We have a modern front-end stack, it's not like, I think it's, personally, I think it's a good balance between having a stable technology and something that's, was released last night. So React and the stack we're using, I think, qualifies. But it's not like the latest word, including the fact that some MFEs are using React, I don't know, 15, and the latest is 17, if I'm not mistaken. So, yep, 18 was already released. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I was writing these slides. I missed it. I was busy doing real work. Yeah. And we have some micro-frontends, right? 18, 19, whichever, but only a few of which a regular member of the community will see right now. Okay, there's the whole enterprise world, right? Which it's pretty fancy and cool. You have to get Kira to show you what she's been working on. But those are not slated for inclusion necessarily in Tutor yet. But we'll have to convince her to help us, right? All right. So this is the situation. This is my take on the situation, Tigril's take on the situation, what have you. We wanted to find out what you think the state of MFEs is, right? So I went around and I asked folks, in some cases I asked explicitly, how do you think MFEs suck? In other cases, I asked, what do you think MFEs are like? Are they good? Are they bad? So the gist of it, this is a very simplified condensation, let's say. A reasonable deprecation process is missing for when a new MFE is built and it replaces something that came before. So the most famous case here is e-commerce, right? So what happened? There was a depper ticket. It was announced that e-commerce was going away. But, there was no replacement that did the same things that e-commerce did before. So this was a big problem for many of you, right? So yeah, we need a better way to do this. Go ahead. Upstream being Django Oscar, yes, that had a lot to do with it. Still, like, that's the excuse, right? We don't have the resources to spend on porting Oscar to a more recent version of MySQL or PostgreSQL or whatever. So yeah, those that were around know what we're talking about. We don't want this to happen anymore. We want, when a new MFE comes in, it replaces something that was there before. At the very least, it does the things that you needed to do. It doesn't need to be everything that was done before by that same feature, but it needs to be what the community needs it to be. So this is key here. Better across the board internationalization. This was your contribution, Sarina. And yeah, we were stuck with React until V2 we have been for a while. And that's sort of limiting in terms of flexibility of what you can do, including like dynamic theme changes. There is no string interpolation in it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that sucked. Notice I say sucked because, spoiler alert, we're upgrading it already, or Adam is. Theming, branding, and multi-tenancy. This is the top ask, right? Can you theme an MFE? An MFE, sure. All of them? No. Okay. So if the MFE behaves, if it was done like with a proper, all right, we'll only include it or consider it done when it does theming properly, Sure, some of them have done that. Not all of them have done that. So we are sort of in a superposition where some MFEs are great and they work, and some don't. So if you happen to only need the ones that are working well with branding, great. If you need the other ones to display a different color, whatever, not so much. How am I doing on time? Okay, 30 minutes. Runtime configuration. So this is a common complaint, not just from folks that are deploying OpenEdX, but from folks that are rebuilding images or using MFEs via Tutor. So the way this works is Tutor uses a single container for all the MFEs it supports via the MFE plugin. So whenever you make a change to the configuration of an MFE, and that configuration lives in the file system of the container, you need to rebuild the image. And rebuilding the image, if you're doing it from scratch, which most people are, that means rebuilding all the MFEs that Tutor supports. And that takes a while. And we now have 18 MFEs. By the time we replace all the pages in the edX platform, I don't know how many we'll have, like 50, 100? I have no idea. So it's going to take a while to rebuild. So this is a problem. Okay, so build time and bundle size, 15 minutes, thank you. It's not just a build time. If each MFE needs, builds a different bundle that the user has to download, by the time you have 20, it's 20 different bundles that need to be downloaded whenever the user, navigates to that particular page. This is really not acceptable in a modern front-end world. So, I don't have the solution yet, but we'll need to fix it. An MFE directory. What are the MFEs that exist? Which ones are getting ready to deploy? Which ones are, better than the others? Which ones are totally done? Star status, whatever. We need to come up with something like this. Redux, you have to watch the video of Fox's. They didn't? Ah, damn, that was a workshop. That's too bad. But there are slides, though, right? Yes. Okay, so ask Fox for his slides on Redux and what he did to replace them, or is doing to replace Redux. So Redux is a cannon to kill a mosquito, right? It handles, I'm not even going to do your short version. This is going to be my short version. It handles state for you, right? In an MFE. If you have a 100-page, 20 endpoint, single-page application, great. Redux will help you organize what's happening and where and when. If you have an MFE that sometimes only does like one or two things, one or two requests from the backend, it doesn't really make sense to use Redux. Okay, there are many other different things you could use. Fox came up with something called Providence. A little bit more on that later. Documentation is also missing. This is a big ask. Like a big ask in the sense that it shouldn't be that hard, but most of the MFEs are not as well documented as they should be, or at least as the best ones that are well documented are, right? So we need better docs on MFEs. Ideas. Ideas on how to solve all this, right? We don't have all the answers. In the past month or so, I was very pleasantly surprised to find that some people were already working on solutions to these problems, and they didn't have to be prompted. I had nothing to do with it. They just went and posted in the forum or in a PR or something, like in a good open source project, right? This is how things should be. And the first example is the multi-tenant MFEs POC by Diana at EduNext. this is, they are trying to solve one or two of those problems I listed. Multi-tenancy is a big thing for some of you. You want to have a single deployment, but different themes for different users of that instance. Okay, so MFEs do not allow that to happen at all right now. So they're coming up with a solution for this. Kshittij at OpenCraft recently submitted a PR with dynamic theme loading for the discussions MFE. It's only for one MFE, so it's not a generic solution, but provided it works, it's an example of what we can use for all the other MFEs. Fox came up with Providence. He presented it yesterday with multiple fractures on his arms, so kudos. This guy is, this is resilience. No, and he broke it the day before. Yeah. Congrats, man. Adam is upgrading React to Intel, as I said. And this is the stuff that I know about. Did I miss anything? Like, do you know of any other ongoing attempts to fix MFE stuff? That's okay. Like, this is the ones I could find. There is low-hanging fruit. This is in David Joy's words. That we can tackle that will help things a lot for us. The first one is configuration 2.0. And this is basically a mix of, let's say, what Kshittij is doing, what EduNext is doing, but in a way that works for everybody. So I like to think of configuration 2.0 as a dynamic configuration mechanism for MFEs, where you can change the look, the variables, anything you like in your MFE, and you let the user do that somehow. Okay, I don't have the answer as to how that will be done. It could be one of the implementations that already exist, or it could be something new. Branding modules, as we discussed, all that's needed is for more MFEs to support branding modules. So you basically just add your own branding module to the Webpack configuration, and boom, you have a theme for MFE. Doesn't solve the dynamic problem, but that's for configuration 2.0. Finally, just why this is a lowish hanging fruit, is plugins for MFEs. There is no consensus on how that's supposed to happen or how we want that to happen yet. David came up with beginnings of an OAP, a draft OAP, where the idea is you introduce iframes or places in your MFE where the administrator, the user, whomever, can replace that with content rendered elsewhere. Okay? So that's one way to do it. Is it the right way? I'm not sure. We need to find out. It's more of a generic. What? Random content. What David was. Whoops. Did that break? Okay. Was when you use comprehensive theming, you can replace a part of a page with whatever you like. Okay. So this is. I'm not sure we'll ever get that kind of flexibility. Let's talk then in MFEs. But this is one way you can do it. This is a low-hanging fruit way you can do it, which is, certain parts of the page you can customize however you like. The drawback being you have to render that somewhere, right? So yeah, this is still up for discussion. And finally, this is the point of the whole talk. What is the roadmap? You tell me, right? And this is what Jenna was talking about earlier today. We're not going to tell you what you want MFEs to do. This is the whole point of the MFE survey, but it's not going to stop now. This should be ongoing. we want to know what MFCs should do, how they can be improved. We want to know if, like, yeah, we should aim towards replacing MFEs entirely. You know, it's up for discussion. There's Mojo Federation. How many of you have heard of that? It's just one idea that came up in one of my discussions. Like, instead of having each MFE on its own domain, you could have sort of a frame for different small MFEs, and they get rendered from, say, S3 as modules and get downloaded only when you need them. That would solve the big bundle problem, for instance. But if we go down that path now, it would be adding a 16th standard before we finish even converting everything to the first one, right? So we need to be careful here. We'll have discussions about this, hopefully on Friday. We don't have a front-end place to discuss because there weren't enough interested parties in the front-end working group, but there's a BTR working group which we could join. And you know, half the discussions in the build test release working group are about MFEs. So we can do that there. That's all I have. Questions? Fox. I forgot.
What is the appetite for potentially introducing TypeScript?
Very high. There is a discussion on a controversial place in GitHub discussions. You know that existed? I found out the other day. So there's a discussion in GitHub discussions on TypeScript, and I played the devil's advocate in that discussion, but I'm pretty convinced TypeScript is a good thing. Just show of hands. I'll do the inverse. Who thinks it's bad? All right, that's what I expected.
I didn't raise my hand, but I do think your devil's advocate point about how accessible is TypeScript to a new developer to the OpenEdX ecosystem, and how good have we historically been at teaching people joining the OpenEdX ecosystem. So I think that is something that, like, as a front-end group, needs to be considered and thought about, and maybe figure out how we can, maybe before we jump into TypeScript, how we're going to address that.
Excellent point. Let me answer with... Oh, okay, yeah, sure, yeah. Thanks for introducing it here. So I made many points that, you know, lovers of TypeScript are going to think, oh, well. Anyway, are we good at teaching folks, at onboarding folks to the code base? Not very yet, but what? Yeah, exactly. If you want to help fix that, Serena's working on an onboarding course for developers. Eventually, when we get to TypeScript, a part of it is going to, you know, there's going to be a chapter on that. What I think will happen is that since Adam is proposing it, and Adam I don't know how to pronounce his name, Stankiewicz? Okay, there you go. He leads Paragon development. So Paragon is likely getting TypeScript pretty soon. I like to hear that. More questions? Kira.
Are there any, I know obviously Jeff Witt is in the picture, but do our MFEs have any like yearly audit for accessibility? And if not, is that something that, because again, with a MFE library, we could have like a grade, or, you know, if they're even out to production and need to be audited, but I don't know.
There's a masked point you're making there, which is standardizing MFEs on something, right? So this is a big, I wouldn't say point of contention, but I want to discuss this a lot with you, because currently you can really you can have your MFE using whatever stack in whatever coffee script. You do whatever you want with the MFE, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Sure, it makes it for easy development. My MFE is not going to use Redux. Okay, cool. It's going to use Providence. What happens if the next MFE over decides they're going to use what was that, context or just plain Axios, whatever. Yeah. For instance, is that a good thing? In terms of standardizing, it's not. But do we want to standardize? Because then we're curbing a little bit of the freedom to do whatever you want with the MFEs. Let me let Florian know, and then you. Go ahead, Florian.
So you you mentioned a potential issue with when we get to essentially a multitude of MFEs, there's going to be sort of a lot of downloading that the client needs to do for the bundles. As a sort of architectural planning question, is the assumption that if you want to make this scale, go with the CDN?
Go with
the CDN for like deploying your bundles? Is that going to be essentially a prerequisite for like running a scalable open edX site?
That's the workaround, I would say. Like that's the caching layer. You get it all on a CDN, and the user's browser cached that, but it's still 20 bundles or 30 or 40 bundles, different bundles.
My concern is just that if you have like a single server that serves all this out, you're going to run into the same bottleneck issue you now have.
Server side.
Yes.
Exactly. That's a yeah. I think folks are already assuming they're going to be served by CDNs, if not now, eventually, because that's the only way that would work, right? So good point.
Looks like we're about at time.
Oh, okay. Last question, or no? Go ahead.
So my big question would be, do we have concrete evidence that the different bundles are actually a problem? And the reason why I would ask this is that if we do lose a lot of freedom by forcing, standardization around particular versions. And if these bundles really aren't that big, and if the network connection of just about every learner is good enough to handle them, and we don't end up using as much bandwidth as we think, then we could end up hamstringing a lot of developers for not a whole lot of benefit.
That's a good point. It's something we'll need to discuss. How a decision is reached is not a mechanism I have a proposal for right now, but we'll come up with one. So it's a good point. You lose freedom. Bandwidth is cheap nowadays. Storage is cheap. Is it worth it curbing ourselves? I think we can optimize. Maybe there's a middle ground. I don't know. We'll find out. So that's it. Thank you, folks.